Alrighty, welcome to Romera Records virtual cast. Today we have on Matthew. How's it going, man?
I'm doing well, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I got you from Podmatch, just like a lot of other people, and basically just saw what you do, who you are, and thought it'd be cool to have a podcast with you. So if you could, I guess just go ahead and get straight on into who you are, what you do, and how you got started.
I'm a business coach right now, a business coach and strategic consultant. I got into this about a year and a half ago. Ran a marketing business for 10 years, kind of bounced around a little bit, did the marketing thing for 10 years. I've also pastored on and off for the last 14 years, bit of real estate. So a little bit of everything, but honestly, all of it was just kind of pointing in this direction. Me working with business owners, entrepreneurs, and trying to get them to reach their full potential. And so I'm loving it.
So out of all those things that you've been doing, what seems to be like the thing that gets your attention the most, and it's like taking up most of your time?
In terms of right now,
Yeah.
yeah. In terms of taking most of my time, it's probably the sessions with my clients. And that's my favorite part. I love being able to just sit there, hear people talk about where they're at, what their dreams are, where they're stuck, and just having a conversation around those things, right? I find oftentimes in the conversation, more than an interview or like an intake form, if I can talk to you and find out where you're at, what's actually going on, how you're feeling about things, we're probably going to get a lot farther, and I'm probably going to get a much clearer picture of what's really going on. And so I just find that so much of that is where I spend a lot of my time and where I want to spend a lot of my time. I'm a really relational person, so to be able to have that with my clients is it's honestly great.
What tends to be your normal client? Like who are the type of people that you're serving?
Yeah, so it's a little bit all over the place, but I'll say that there's a general, business owners, entrepreneurs, and just high level performers. So most business owners and companies that I work with, they've got at least a few employees. They're generally between 30 to 50, I'd say, or 25 to 50 age range, and they're looking to grow, but more than just a hey, you know what, I flipped the switch on a marketing campaign, or I'd love 300 new clients right now. I mean, who wouldn't want another $1 million, right? But it really comes down to people who are like, no, I want to grow and I want to potentially look at building differently because maybe they're stuck, maybe they're feeling frustrated, maybe their day to day is just caught up with stuff. They can't breathe is honestly what I hear from a lot of people, and so I find it resonates with me because that was my struggle for a long time. So it's really easy to come at those things, show empathy, get into the trenches with people, and hopefully show them a way out.
So I've noticed a lot of people that I do podcasts with that do coaching, they don't help people who are or companies or people, whichever one, who are basically starting out. They usually are helping people who have more employees or bringing in more revenue, stuff like that. Do you feel like that's it's too much of a struggle to help people who are like just starting out compared to people who already have something going for them, and you're just trying to help them reach a new level?
No, that's a great question. It's actually not that I'm opposed to working with solopreneurs or people that are just starting out. I find the dichotomy in terms of budget, time commitment, people starting out. It feels like, especially in my experience, and I've been there. This is now my third business. I've bootstrapped the other two, and so it just feels like when you're a solopreneur or you're a startup, you've got a finite amount of resources, in terms of people, talent, money. And so it's not that I don't want to work with those people, it's that I often question whether coaching is the right way to hop in right at the beginning. It almost feels like, let's see what people are made of, let's throw some stuff to the wall, see what sticks, and then it feels like a great opportunity for coaching to come in.
That makes a lot of sense because I recently started a business, and with that business I basically started to like change what we were doing, and ended up hiring a coach, a guy that I knew to help with that. And it so when he was helping us, it seemed like he was trying to help us like how most people do. It's like, what kind of revenue are you bringing in? How can we increase? but realistically, we weren't even at that point. Like he had to take 6 steps backwards to meet us where we were in just like helping us figure out what the heck we're even doing. And I can tell it kind of threw him off for what he usually does. Cause like the things that he was giving us to help us were like things that it seems like you would give somebody who already was like making a good bit of money and needed help with that kind of stuff. So I definitely think what you just said is a big contribution because one, you don't know where people's head is at or their heart is at with their business, and then two, when they're first starting out, and then two, um, you don't know what that kind of person like what they're willing to do, what they're ready to do as far as like their future expenses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But if they're already established and they're already bringing in revenue, then you can just analyze their history and stuff like that. So pretty much from there, you're just looking at numbers. But if you're looking at a startup where they're just starting out, you're looking at the person.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say this because I feel like that's one of the reasons why I've got a bit of a unique approach to my practice. So many business coaches and consultants, they kind of operate in one of two domains, right? Either you're working with the business owner and it's a lot of strategy, big ideas, where are we headed this year? What are our big rocks? What are our 5 years? And that's important and it's needed. And then you've got consultants that'll come in and they're like, okay, well, let's build systems, structures, let's figure out the implementation, right? For example, right? That business coach coming to you guys and saying, well, how are we going to get there? And you're like, man, we don't have those systems in place. We don't know it. Well, we don't have the answers to your questions. And so one of the things that I do is I marry the two because in my mind, if you bring me in for strategy, but your implementation sucks, you're actually wasting your time and money. And I don't want that because I want to keep my clients. I want to see them succeed. I want to build a relationship with them. That's super important to me. And so for me, I want to live in both domains. Right. And so that's why one of my packages that I even do is where I'll actually work with the business owner or the entrepreneur, or the decision maker, then I'll actually work with the operations team. Right. And we'll do, biweekly, weekly, whatever it takes. But I want to help bridge that gap between, okay, Jackson, you've got a great idea. Let's take that from concept and let's move it to completion. And I think that's really where the industry is going is, you and I can sit here and we can dream and that's fantastic. But at the end of the day, the underpinnings, whatever those systems, those structures, those SOPs, all the fun stuff, that stuff's really important too. And so how do we marry strategy and implementation? That's what I'm trying to do in my niche as a business coach.
So with all that, like what seems to be a thing that you end up helping with people the most? Do people need help with like their strategy, their day-to-day things, or does it seem like people are struggling with, the same thing all the time? What seems to be the trend amongst the people that you help?
Yeah, and to be honest, it is a trend. It feels like people, especially again, business owners, entrepreneurs, high level performers, it's usually the same stuff. We're talking people are stuck, and there's a bit of paralysis there. What's their next move? How do they get unstuck? Either they're drowning in the day to day because they're actually operating the business, and so many of the things like they're not short on ideas, they're not short on what they want to do. They just don't have time, right? How do you work on the business and building it when you're so caught up in working in the business? So those are the two primary ones, but almost always, man, I ask the same question when I come into a business. And I ask it because it's what I went through. Again, it's all born out of personal experience and my story. But I ask business owners all the time, I say, hey, heaven, God forbid, if something were to happen to you and you got knocked out for a month, maybe longer, but a month, what would happen to your business? And almost always I just see like like nervous, awkward, fear kind of come on people. And more often than not, the response is, yeah, if it was a month, my business would be done. It'd be decimated. And I tell people, and it sounds cliche, but it's the truth. And I'm like, you don't have a business, you have a job. Because
Mm.
if you don't show up to your job, you don't get paid. And so let's build you a business, right? And now that's where that conversation opens up because all those people, they could have been stuck, right? They could be drowning in the day to day. They could want to make $1 million, but actually have no idea of how profitable the business is, because measurements are hard to come by and no one's really tracking that stuff. But at the end of the day, all of that pales in comparison to, let's attack the root of this. And the root of this may be, if you're not driving this ship, and you're not taking calls at 9 p.m., or you're not working 6 days a week or whatever it is, you don't have a business. So let's figure out why that is. And more often than not, all those other problems that I mentioned earlier that people actually identify as a problem, those get fixed out when we really start to live in reality and find out what's happening.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I've never heard of somebody say it like that, because it's really about understanding, like, what am I actually doing? Like, if I'm running this business, what am I actually a part of when it comes to, like, the day to day, or as you said, if I got knocked out, what's going to happen? And I think it's important for people to do that kind of evaluation, once a month, once a quarter, once a year, something like that, just to understand how they can progress. Because if you don't, know what would happen if situations come up in your life, then you probably don't have a plan for the future, because you should know exactly what's going to happen, because your future plans would be setting you up for whatever circumstances come up. So yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
Totally. It's funny. So one of my first clients, and I had known them from my marketing business. We hopped in, so I knew a little bit about business, and I asked the wrong question, and I was starting out, and I said, "Hey, so what's your goal? Like, in bringing me in, what's the hope?" And they said, "We want to do 5 million in business." And so I was like, "Okay, that's cool, ambitious. I love it." And then we started to break it down, and I did this analysis. I came back to them 2 weeks later, and I said, "Okay, so just so you know, you're actually barely profitable. So if we scale up, you're not going to make any profit. Your revenue is going to go up, but you're not going to be making any money. And also, it's probably going to up your workload." They were like 45 hours as a business owner to like 60 hours. So is your goal still to make $5 million? And they just kind of sat there and they were like, and it kind of brought this idea out that I now implement with all my clients. Rather than talk goals, because we all have goals and we all have this like idea, I ask people, I say, what does success look like?
Hmm.
That's the question. And that question has so many layers. Success could look like a monetary number, but it probably also looks like, what does your time commitment look like? Right? What is success? If we're going to be real honest, what does success feel like in terms of your stress levels, your mental health, your boundaries? What does success sound like? Does it sound like the stress levels at your work, like people are shouting at each other, even though we're making a lot of money? And so it's funny because people get a little weirded out in the beginning. I can tell, because I'm like, no, I want you to feel this on the sensory side. It's not some hocus pocus exercise. I want you to really understand, what does success look like and how does it impact? Because when we figure that out, now we've got a plan. Now we know where we're headed. And more often than not, when people do that, you know, we can actually get to a place where now we know what success looks like for you. Let's build a plan for that. Let's not build a plan for a goal that you have in your head because that's what society says. That's what you heard on a podcast. And you're like, man, I got to hustle and grind to make this. Otherwise, I'm done.
So I actually want to kind of break down that conversation. When you ask that question, I'm always interested in companies who are making money and then compared. Okay, let me reemphasize: making revenue compared to making profit, because there's a lot of people out there who are making a lot of revenue, but they aren't profitable. And there's some people who are killing it as far as profit wise, but they might not be actually bringing in a ton of revenue. So I mean, you can kind of have two uh,
Yeah.
sides of the spectrum. What how I guess how hard is it to get people to think, even in that case, you can speak about that case. How hard is it to get people to understand how much money they're making compared to being actually profitable? Do people really care about like I just want to make a ton of money, the profit isn't really as important? Or do people like, well, I got to make a profit and I don't care how much, we're actually revenuing?
Yeah. Great question. So here's what I've come to learn. And I learned this the hard way. And now I see it in so many other people. And so that's why I think it's funny. Everybody cares about revenue when they're not measuring the numbers.
Hmm.
Everybody cares about revenue. Like, for example, a great way to illustrate this is, you ask people like, oh, what's your net worth? Someone's like, oh, 1.5 million. And then you dig deeper and you're like, you've got 1.2 million in debt. So I'm like, sure, your net worth is, like you think it's 1.5. It's like, you're actually 1.2 billion in debt, man. Like you're counting the debt on your car, you're counting the debt on your house. Hey, all the power to you. And I find that happens in business, right? Everybody wants the revenue. Like, man, we did 8 figures in revenue. Like, okay, let's peek under the hood. And as we start to, it's a business adage that I live by, but you can't manage what you're not measuring. And you definitely can't multiply what you're not managing. So it all starts from measurement. And obviously, you can measure everything. There are some key things that probably relates back to the conversation of what does success look like? Because if I ask you and you figure out what success looks like for you, then we're going to actually know what we need to measure, right? But that measurement idea, once people start to measure, it's so funny how the light goes on. They're like, I don't care about the bigger number. I want to know what's profit. That profit number is scary, right? So when people aren't measuring, revenue's the goal. When people are measuring, it's hilarious how profit now becomes the thing where people are like, oh man, we need to cut this. We need to cut this. You're telling me we're spending thousands of dollars on this software? I mean, for one of my clients, because one of the things we do through our process, we'll do audits. We'll do calendar audits. How are we spending our time? And we'll do financial audits. How are we spending our money? And does our time and our money align with our goal of success, right? And so in doing that financial audit, I love coming up with these things because they're easy wins for people. Like one, I'm working with a law firm, and turns out they're spending $700 on email services a month.
Hmm.
And at the end of the audit, we realized that I think it was like over $500, that $700 was being spent on old accounts for people that didn't work there anymore or things that weren't being used. You know, that's a 6K a year. And you may say, oh, whatever, 6K, but that's 6K in terms of your profit margin and your ability to harness that into other things, that compounds. And if I can find that in one area, I can find it in others. So that differentiation that you brought up, revenue versus profit, look, everybody's business is going to look different, but I really think that when people lock in on the measurement and really understanding that you can't manage what you're not measuring, they start to get more in tune with, oh crap, let's get that profit number up. It's not so much about let's just, stroke our egos and try and get to 8 figures.
So something that I have always thought is absolutely crazy is what you just brought up, like the story of the emails, because I guess it's people who make a good bit of money usually don't really think about all the small things that they're spending money on. Because like if you don't make that much money, every dime matters to you. But it's like
Man,
the more money you make, like the small purchases, you're like, man, I can have this Netflix account, this Hulu account, blah blah blah, and things just kind of add up, but you don't really worry about it. So, how do you think companies get into that position where there, as you said, is just so many people were on these email accounts that they don't even work there anymore? How do you think people even put themselves in those positions?
yeah, it's funny. I also used to share that mentality where I was like, man, is it just that you make more money, so now you've got different problems, so those old problems don't matter as much? But I've actually found it's one of two things. One, your business has grown, or your responsibilities have grown, so you may not be in charge of that thing anymore. And oftentimes it falls between the cracks. In this case, it wasn't a matter of anyone being malicious, of anyone not doing their job. When you looked at the org chart and you mapped out who had what responsibilities, there was nobody who was taking responsibility for offboarding. We had an onboarding process to make sure that people were hired, and that included creating the accounts and giving them access. But there was no process for offboarding. It was sayonara, see you later, and that process didn't mirror the onboarding. Another case that I often see with people, again, just simply a matter of neglect, not out of malice, is that when people start to get really into building their business, they start to justify those expenses as like, oh, that's just the cost of doing business, right? So like when you start out, like as a startup, and I'm sure that you can relate to this, as a startup, you're like, man, $100 for that software, I'm not spending that. Can I get it done for 20 or 30? And so you start to become more familiar and you think, oh, well, maybe that's just the cost of doing business now that we're 5 times the size or 10 times the size. And it's just not the case, right? And again, people don't know. A lot of assumptions are being made. And so that's why I think one of the biggest things in the implementation process that I work on with teams is I say, we need to make sure that everything in this company, everything in this organization, it has to fall on somebody's shoulder, right? So let's make sure there's really clear divisions of labor, divisions of work, so that these things get thought of, right? That offboarding process where, that got missed, that's a simple fix under HR, right? And now that they know about it, they're like, man, we're on this. But we would have, we just didn't think about it. So it really helps sometimes visually just lay everything out and to have an understanding. Because at the end of the day, I used to think it was very much like, oh, okay, you know, new levels, different problems, but that's just not the case. For a lot of people, it's out of sight, out of mind because they're hopping in new responsibilities, or at the end of the day, it just falls through the cracks.
Do you feel like that falls on the business owner or like the people who they kind of like put in charge? I guess if you have, let's just say you have a 10 person company and you have like an owner and then you have people that they have in charge. Who do you usually try to help with that accountability? You go straight to the owner and be like, hey, you need to be doing this and helping them with that? Or do you try to go to the people who are like managing things and be like, all right, you guys need to start working on these things to kind of help the owner out?
Yeah, man. Honestly, that's such a good question. At the end of the day, it's funny. Like when problems get discovered or issues or gaps, I feel like it's human nature. We want to blame somebody, right? Like who's this fall on? Whose fault is it? And I want to stay away from that. The way I like to look at it is, okay, so if I'm the business owner, I hired an operator. I gave them a scope, right? Does this fall under the scope? And if the answer is yes, then okay, great. Let's chat with the operator. If it didn't, then I actually have a problem where I didn't hire correctly or I didn't lay things out. There's this 3-step process that I'm telling you I found to be just so effective at making sure that things don't fall through the cracks and that we kind of account for everything. And obviously human nature, things are going to happen, but it's this idea that, there's the goal, then there's your role, what you do, and then we inspect what the expectation of your role was, right? And so, okay, so what's the goal? What does success look like, right? So we clarify the goal, right? And then we define what the role is and how does the role work at actively trying to get success. We're not just creating a job description. It's like, if this is success, how are we getting your job into doing this thing and outworking this outcome? And then the last one is, okay, well, now how do we have regular inspections on this expectation that we've now set, right? Not micromanaging, right? A simple quarterly checkup, right? Could have avoided that email thing, and many others. But so I think that 3-step process really helps us define. More often than not, it depends on the business size, right? So oftentimes, if I'm looking at a business that's sub 10 people, it's probably an ownership thing. If I'm looking at just over 10, it's probably an operator thing. But that's why I love to workflow things, lay it all out. And rather than blame people, we can all just say, hey, this is obviously how it happened. We figured that out. Where do we go from here?
I did a podcast with this guy, Daniel, and he would help people with like their anxiety and fear. And his big thing was making things simple. And from the time that I've talked to you in this podcast, it seems like that's what you do. You do a really good job at breaking things down. And I can tell that's like, to me, that's how I know somebody is good at what they do. If they can like break it down for you and just like make anybody understand. I always say, you truly don't understand something until you can explain it to a fifth grader. And
Mm,
I think that's something that you're currently doing while you're talking is like you're making this sound like it's so simple. You're making every business owner that's struggling sound like they're an idiot because it's like, yo, these this is so simple. Just do this, this, and this, and you're good. And I think sometimes people can kind of talk circles, and it's like what they said just doesn't make sense. But it's not. It doesn't sound like that's what you do. What I guess like what has helped you understand that? Like, what has helped you understand businesses? Is it just the repetition? Is it just working with different kinds of businesses or different kinds of people? What do you think has attributed to your ability to just kind of just really be able to focus and be like, all right, just do this thing?
Yeah, no, first off, I really appreciate that. I think that's absolutely one of my goals. I tell people all the time, like, you're the expert in your field. You're in this industry. I'm not in this industry. So if you're hiring me as like to throw you a lifeline, that's not my job. My job is to pull the best out of you and to try and see your blind spots and ask the questions that get you flowing into your expertise again. Right. And so to play off of that, I think for me, I always try and put myself in the shoes of the business owner. Yes, repetition has helped me. Yes, exposure to different industries and clients has helped me. But I've also been a business owner, right? And I don't want to take anybody down a path that I haven't been. And as great as they are, theories didn't save me when I was in struggling, right? Uh, and so at the end of the day, all of those lessons that I've learned and that I've, workshopped and networked with people and learned from them, those are the things that we apply because I, I personally, I take it, it's a great responsibility when someone hires me and they're paying me. I'm like, man, I'm not trying to waste this person's money because I want them to achieve the goal, what success looks like. I want them to stick around and I want to have a relationship with this person. And so for me, it's really important that I figure out, okay, how do we zoom out and make this super relatable and incredibly understanding for people so that they can hop in and they can do this? Because again, and I know it's probably a terrible sales pitch, but you could go read a book, you could listen to a podcast, and you can learn so much and find so many of the tools of what I'm probably going to tell you. The difference is, and the reason why you hire me is because I'm here to help you find the blind spots, to make these things simple, and to provide the accountability to say, hey, let's keep going, let's keep on track.
Yeah, that's something that I usually tell people when it comes to like doing something that might seem like a saturated market. Like if you get on Instagram, you can find 1,000 people who do coaching, right? But if if you can find somebody who you feel like can help you specifically, like in your situation, talk to you and communicate well with you, it's like being in a relationship, right? Like you
Mm.
could technically be in a relationship with anybody, like any other human being, male, female, whatever. But like the reason why you get in a relationship and start dating somebody is because you feel like you can connect with that person. Like that person, the way that they operate helps you best. And that's like how you hire a coach is like any of these coaches can help you, but you pick a certain one because that person seems like they connect with you the best.
Totally. And I love that explanation. I think that how you said that is exactly how it is, right? There's kind of this awkward dating phase and like, you're filling people out. But I try and be as honest with people as I can. For me, it is really about relationship. It's about a vibe. And so for me, like I've turned down, prospective clients who by all accounts were amazing, but it just didn't feel like I was going to be able to be honest and go there with them. Um, if they listen to the podcast, they're probably going to despise me right now. But one of my clients last week in a session just burst into tears, a business owner, and that's okay because there's a component of my job that's emotion, right? And I'm there to hey, hear them out, validate their feelings, and say, great, now where can we go from here, right? Because I think so many of the reasons and you know the the things we think about when hiring a coach or hiring an advisor is probably because we have a fear, right? There's an underlying fear, right? What if I'm stuck? Man, maybe that fear is how do I get out? How do I get unstuck? Right? If your business is stagnant, man, is it always going to be this way? Is it going to go in reverse? Am I going to lose? And so instead of exploiting those fears, what if we actually met in the middle? We took the time to understand each other. And myself as a coach, I want to try and disarm those fears so people can get back to doing what they do best. And that's hopefully building and growing a business.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely important for people to number one, just be honest with themselves, like when they're talking to you, because sometimes people want to. put on a facade or just be different when they hire a coach, right? Because you don't want to look bad to the person you're hiring to help you, so you kind of mask, where you're at. But the more open you are with you, again, relationship advice, the more open you are with this other person, the better they can help you become a better you and deal with you. Because if somebody is masking all these things about their business to you, and then you start evaluating things, you're like, hey, what is this? And they're like, yeah, about that. Like it makes it harder and harder for you to do your job.
Oh, it's such a good parallel. It's funny. I had someone reach out a few months ago. Great company. Um, the relationship didn't end up working out. I didn't want to go forward with it. It was really funny because when we were kind of in the due diligence phase, the sell from this company was fantastic. Hey, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. And I just kind of joked and I said, is there anything wrong with the business? Right? Like what are you hiring me for? And it's really funny because out of that kind of is where the uncertainty kind of crept in. And I was like, I think we're selling something here that is better than what's probably under the hood. And it's what you said. I always encourage people like we need to live in reality, right? You need one step in the present and one step in the future. But you've got to live in reality. I'd rather us say, this is where we're at. And maybe that sucks a little bit, but guess what? We can figure out a way to get to A or B or Z or wherever you want to go here, right? Whatever success looks like. But I think that starts with acknowledging, and that's why the parallels to relationships that you're throwing out are they're fire.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of people who can look at themselves honestly and realize like what they can improve on, because those are the type of people who know one, their potential, and then two, also um they're able to take that present look at themselves and be realistic about their future goals. When people aren't so honest about themselves, they tend to have like unrealistic goals, right? So like whether it be your physique, somebody might be like, oh, I want to lose 50 pounds by May. It's like, all right, first of all, let's look at where how did you get to this current point,
Yeah.
and think about how long it's going to take you to get to that point. So it's important for people, and it's obvious the kind of people who are willing to take a honest look at their business or themselves and be able to predict what they can do in the future by understanding like what they're actually capable of, because what you want to do and what you're actually going to do are can be two completely different things.
Super different things. Yeah, you're right.
Is there something that you feel like when you work with people that you want to be able to establish, I would say from the get-go, like, because sometimes people might have expectations or standards that they when they hire a coach, they're like, oh, I need you to do this, this, and this. But is there certain like boundaries or standards that you kind of have to establish from the get-go?
Yeah, I always establish boundaries, and I encourage business owners to do the same. I love to I love to just probe. And so, I'll ask questions right off the bat and I'll say, hey, how many hours a week do you work in? Everybody says 40, miraculously. Every business owner just lives a perfectly regimented life. Everybody's working 40 hours. Then you start to ask, and like, okay, well, I take the odd message at 7, the odd email at 8. And I tell them like, unless something's burning down, unless it's an emergency, you've allowed this. That's why this culture exists. But you need to establish boundaries the same way you would in life, in relationships. And so for me as a coach, I do establish boundaries, but I tell people right off the bat, and it's one of the reasons why, it's probably to my detriment, to be honest. But everything's built on trust. And while trust takes time, I need a base level of trust. Right. And so I tell people right off the bat, if we don't have a base level of trust and we're both not willing to at least take a step, it's going to be really hard, and it's probably not going to be a very functional relationship, right? Because I actually want to, pop open the hood and see what's underneath, and let's have questions. I'm going to interview people on the team. I want to get a good feeling because I want to help you, right? You're bringing in a coach, and so I want to coach you, and I think that trust has to be there. And just as a secondary piece, I've definitely learned this over the last little bit. My favorite clients, my best clients, are coachable. which seems like a bit of an oxymoron when you're hiring a coach. But I love people that are coachable, right? You know, I'm going to be wrong. They're going to be wrong. I'm going to be right. They're going to be right. It's not about right or wrong. It's okay. Can someone take ownership and say, this is where I'm at. I have done things that have not worked out. I've done things that have worked out, but I am open to ideas and strategies that are counterintuitive to where I've been and that are probably offensive to my mind right now. And I think that coachability, man, like it's an attitude thing, but it is so, so key. You can want to make, and I love that you drew this distinction earlier, you can want to make $10 million. You can want to lose 50 pounds, but what you want and what you're willing to do are two different things. And I think that willingness, that coachability, just massive.
Yeah, you were cooking with the coachability thing because there's so many people who basically they know that they need help and they want help, but they don't know how to deal with the help. Like they don't know how to actually take the advice and just go with it. And it can be a bit of an ego thing. It could be as you said, like personality. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you tell somebody, they will just be so hesitant to just do what you said. And it's like, and also, I forgot what I don't know if I was watching a seminar or something, but somebody was talking about like people who have the rebel personality. There's certain personalities that people just have, and some people have this rebel personality, and it's where like whatever option you give them, they do the opposite. So if you say you can only have red or blue. Like their hand goes up and say, "Well, what about green? I want green." Some people just have that rebel personality to where they just it's hard for them to just take instructions. It's hard for them to just take advice. First of all, I was going to ask, do you have those kind of people? But I'm sure you have those kind of people. but how do you deal with those kind of how do you deal with those kind of people? How do you coerce them to be able to just listen to what you're saying and trust, as you said, you kind of have to build that trust factor, trust what you are giving them advice on.
Yeah. So you know what? I'm not a believer in coercion. So there's no coercion here. And if I were to explain it like a fifth grader, if if you want your dessert now, just know that there are things that are going to happen versus if you get your dessert later, right? So you might feel sick if you have it now. Your tummy might or whatever, right? And so I just sit there, just like in your rebel example. I'm looking to create this framework for people that I'm like, you're a rebel. That's the way that you're designed. That's beautiful. Embrace that. Your rebel side works really, really well here, and we need it. We need it to provide a different viewpoint. We need it to go against the grain when someone wants to just throw a cookie cutter solution. Here's where you're going to need to learn to balance it. You're going to need to learn to balance it when we need organization. You're going to need to learn to balance it when we need structure and different things. And so it's really sitting with people. And this is where the relationship is so huge, right? It's why I don't just subscribe to, okay, cookie cutter business stuff. Let's throw out the 17-step framework. And if this doesn't work, you're screwed. It's got to be that relationship because, yes, I do have clients that can be difficult at times, but that tenacity about them, that grit is also what makes them really successful in different areas. So within the business context, how do we leverage people's strengths and how do we minimize their weaknesses? How do we work? I'll give you a real quick, great example. I'm working with a brand right now, a health brand, and they're fantastic. I work with the owners and the lead operator. And the lead operator she is a whiz. Okay. Like she will create any structure, any system immediately. She'll crush it. But I also know if left to her own devices, she will do it all herself, 70, 80, 90 hours. And so part of the struggle, right, with her, and she's getting like leaps and bounds progress, is hey, here's a task. And by the way, you can only do 50% of it yourself. Good luck. See you later. Talk to you soon. Right. And so now like I could see the frustration on her. But now I also see the celebration where she's like, man, I didn't want to delegate that. I didn't want to train that person. I'd rather do it myself. But it was kind of exciting to do it. And so again, recognizing someone is so good at something and that can have some counter effects, but that's okay. It's how do we, within the context of business, make sure that those nuances work for the positive and work for the positive of the business. So
Yeah, I can say like as a person who does a lot, like I do a plethora of things. It was definitely a eye opener for me to realize that I had a problem with that. Like I always wanted to do everything myself because I was like, nobody can do this better than me. Like I might as well just do it. And the day I realized that just getting somebody else to do it, no matter if they did, a 4 out of a 10 on the scale of like how well they accomplished the job, I did nothing. Like I had to do nothing for it. The other person
yeah,
did all the work. And so that saved me so much time and effort and stress. And I was like, oh my God, this feels amazing.
man. And there's two ways of looking at it. I love how you just said it because it's like I look at everything on a scale of 100%. If that person did 50% of the job you would, that's 50% that you didn't have to do, right? And that also, that first perspective is great. Now we have a baseline. How do we take that person to 60, to 70, to 80, right? And then the other one, I remember having this conversation with a client, and somebody, I asked them on a scale of 1 to 10, how's this person doing in this task? And they're like, oh, 3, 2.5, 3. We just kept coming back. And I was like, okay, so what do you think the problem is? Oh man, I just don't think this person has it. I don't think they're, whatever. And I just stopped, and I've known this client, disclaimer, I've known this client for a long time. And I said, who hired this person? Awkward silence, right? And I was like, so so we can do one of two things, right? We can blame the person, we can shame the person, or we can train the person. Because at the end of the day, this was a hiring problem and you do the hiring, right? And the person may or may not be the right fit, but this gives us an opportunity to expose, okay, what was it about this process and the system that led us to this result, right? And so I just think at the end of the day, and I live by, I love to, one of the biggest wins I give my clients right away is this idea: what do we automate? What do we delegate? What do we eliminate?
Mm.
Right? If you can automate 20%, if you can delegate 20%, and if you can eliminate, because I promise you can eliminate, we're all doing redundant things, 10%, great. You just freed up 50% of your time. That 50% of your time could be spent on revenue generating things, developing people, whatever. And that's really my heart for business. I'm like, how do we keep getting your time? You don't need a lifeline. You don't need a vacation. You just need command on your calendar. That's what you need. And so I love going through that exercise because I find it really, really powerful. Because at the end of the day, look, I think no matter who you are, we all have control issues at some level. And some of them are really well meaning, but I think at its core, we all struggle.
So with all the people that you've worked with and different companies that you've had to deal with, what would you say is probably the most fun client as far as like, how you have helped them and what they've been able to accomplish in your realm of work?
Jackson, you really ask me who my favorite client is right now? No, I'm playing. Um, so I
It,
think
it could
for
be
me,
it could be past stuff, just like what has been a fun client that you like, man, I'm glad, I had them as a client because I got to
yeah,
work with them or whatever.
one of my favorite clients that I'm actually working with right now on the business coaching side. They're a yoga and fitness brand, and they're about to expand. But I think the part that I love the most about them is that we've built. I mean, they have all the hallmarks. They're coachable. They're fun to be around. But we built relationship, and that's something that I love in this business. Right? Like they've invited me over to their. It's a flight. It's like a 5 hour drive away. They've had me up. We've done strategy sessions. We've gone to restaurants, and every relationship's going to look different. But the idea that I've seen this business grow tremendously, and I've seen the people grow as people, and for them to come back to me, and say, "Hey, thank you so much for what you're doing, what you've done." It's just really, really validating for me. And the fact that we can incorporate and we can have joy along the ride, and we can go and do stuff, and we'll just make jokes on calls, and we've started to develop some inside jokes, and the operator, she her one of her dogs had like 10 puppies, and she like on the business call, like holds up the puppy. And it's like, man, it's amazing, right? Like we're really, my motto, and I think I said it earlier in the podcast, my motto has always been, if we build people, you're going to build business. And I want to be that way in my coaching practice. If I can build into people, they're the ones that are actually going to build the business. Yes, we're going to do some structural business things, and we're going to get to some details and some fancy jargon. For sure, that'll happen. But if I keep building people and help develop people, they're going to build their businesses. And so that client in particular is just so much fun. And to see the progress and all of that, it just makes it worth the ride, right? And these are people that I didn't have a close relationship with, didn't really know that well. And so to see where it's come now, I'm actually headed there for a strategy session in a couple of weeks. It's just a ton of fun. And yeah, I love it.
And the exact opposite. What's your worst experience working with somebody?
Yeah. I had a client on the marketing side. Really interesting because objectively, it's the kind of client that everybody would want. It was a decent sized name. They had a really good budget, really easy to deal with to get into the organization. But it felt like, I honestly felt at one point that I was like, what are you paying me for? Right. And while that may be everyone's cup of tea and it was a good chunk of change, at the end of the day, I'm like, I can make money anywhere. We can all make money anywhere. Right. But the power is that you get to choose how you make your money, where you make your money. And so for me, I just didn't feel good about it. It felt like I'd go into meetings and say, hey, it'd be really cool if we tried this. Well, one of the things I do, and this is probably going to go against the grain, but everybody's out here trying to create and innovate. And there's definitely a degree of that is needed. And I love it. And I love those trailblazers. But I tell people, especially a lot of small, medium businesses, you need to get into the imitation game. Okay. Imitation is the best form of flattery. You need to go and look at some of the biggest cities in the world, and whoever's in your field, what they're doing in those cities. Like, the adage goes, in New York, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? If somebody's making it in your field there, learn from that. What are they doing? That's awesome. Is there something you can implement, right? Why don't you reach out to that owner and say, hey, we're in the same field. We're not competitors. We are hours, time zones away. But I would like, can I pay you to pick your brain? And so some of those things trying to implement, but at the end of the day, this client just like, no, we're different. We're trying to do things this way. And, they were super stuck in, they would read a business book and it's like, well, it's all about this business book, right? Every 6 months, there was a new strategy and it just became exhausting. And again, we can all make money. Jackson, you can make money anywhere, right? I didn't get into that line of work to just make money. I want to make an impact and I want to feel fulfilled. And I didn't feel like I did either of those two things, even though I made money. And so, worst client, hated it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool that you were able to even understand that client wasn't really fulfilling your needs, and it's a bit of a give and take at a certain point where you can get drained by working with somebody who isn't exactly your, as you said, like your cup of tea. Like they might be doing something that is just completely taking away, and like whatever your relationship with that client is could be hurting your relationship with other clients. Like if you had a 1 hour meeting with this client and they're just like beating you down, and then you have another meeting right after that, the next client's gonna be like, man, what's up with him today? And it's just because of the other client. So yeah, that's good that you were able to acknowledge what was going on in that situation so that you could be the best and be your best and be on top of your game for everybody else and all the other things that you do to make money.
Yeah, just quickly, it goes back to what we had said way earlier in the conversation, but you would ask, why don't you work with more startups, or what about startups? And it's this idea that I'm like, I love optimization, and we can optimize something that is existent, even if in its basic form. And so you think about this stuff, like for me growing up, or starting out in this, and also growing up, but starting out in my first business, it's this idea that I didn't have the luxury. So if I had 10 clients, 7 of them were bad and 3 were good. And the goal wasn't to get 10 good clients at that time. That was unrealistic. The goal becomes, well, how do I go 6 and 4? How do I go 5 and 5? Then how do I shift the paradigm to now where I'm at a place where, man, on a business coaching level, I have the freedom to choose my clients and I love where I'm at. And I think so much in the same way that to me, it's that understanding that let's just slowly optimize things, right? Like even when you're delegating, right? Like you were saying, if somebody does 40%, man, let's celebrate that. We get upset and be like 60% was bad. Let's celebrate the 40%. And the next time let's aim for 50. And with time and travel, we will see that get higher and higher. So I just think that the optimization idea and principle is really effective and it can really change your perspective.
Is there some things that you haven't done that you want to do in the future for clients, whether it be just like day to day type stuff or just like significant goals to work with like a certain client, maybe not a person, but like a certain category of, you say you've been working with like health and fitness people, maybe you want to work with a coffee company, something. Just what kind of goals or aspiration do you have on working with different people?
I think if I'm thinking goals in terms of my clients, what I would love to do is I'd love to get to a place in the next few years where I could have a retreat and go away with some of my clients, especially some of the key decision makers. Because while there is strategy, I just think that there's so much power in, again, I've got a vibe, I've got a personality, I've got a style. And so I'm attracting a lot of people that fit into that. And I cross pollinate all the time. So I would just love to take those people somewhere and let them kind of cross pollinate and make connections and do all that. I think it'd be super beneficial because I think to see so many business owners and so many people that like struggle, like successes, learn from each other and spend time together would be just another layer for my business. And more importantly, just another layer for them as people. And so that's definitely something I would love to do in the future in terms of the business.
Do you think you have any specific gaps or issues that might be stopping you from doing certain things or accomplishing certain goals, whether it just be your time or finances? What do you think are any kind of stop gaps that you have in your career?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the big thing. So I was a pastor for many years, and one of those components was I public spoke quite a bit, and I loved that. I loved being able to inspire people and serve people in that way. And so I would like to get back into that, and now in a business context. And so for me, again, I think it's probably just a bit of a function of time. I've just recently started doing podcasts in the last few weeks, and I'm hoping to maybe start getting into the public speaking by the end of the year. But I think it's more just a time and experience thing, experience within the business world. And so that's something that I've got my eyes on in terms of, I want to, we didn't even get into it on the podcast, but tell some of my story and where I came from and what I went through as a means to hopefully serve a bunch of people and maybe inspire a few of them from it. So, yeah.
Well, I do really like getting into that aspect. As you said, we haven't really talked about it. And I had on a yoga instructor, and she was kind of confused that I was like actually interested in talking about just the story instead of just like business stuff. So yeah, go ahead. I think we got about like what, at least 5 minutes. So again, your story, give us a wrap up of that, like how you started, all that good stuff.
Yeah, yeah, just quickly. So I'm a first generation. My father's a refugee, my mother's an immigrant. So we grew up with nothing. My parents, amazing people. I grew up with a great ecosystem, but again, I recognize the hustle that it took for two people that were not from this part of the world to make a life and make my floor their ceiling, right? And so did that. Um, started into a great career. My early 20s, traveled across North America doing presentations. Pretty lucrative job for a guy in his 20s. And then 12 years ago, I got into a horrific car accident. 10 minutes shy of midnight. I was driving home one night from ex-girlfriend's house. I was dating her at the time. She lived in the country, and two horses jumped out on the road at the last second in the pitch black of night. And I was driving an SUV at the time. They were bigger than my SUV. Absolutely total, like instantly. When they measured, it was 3 inches, and I'd be dead.
Mm.
And I did what every young, dumb male in his 20s did, and I just pretended like it never happened. So I went back to playing sports that week, went back to work. And then within a few weeks, I started to realize, oh crap, I have really bad chronic pain. Oh crap, I have headaches that I would find out are cluster headaches that can incapacitate me for days, weeks at a time. Depression the whole bit. And so my career in the corporate world ended pretty quickly. It ended at 25 with me lying on my parents' basement floor, depressed, doing nothing with my life. Couldn't get up some days. Didn't have the motivation to others, and that, like, man, to lay it out frankly, you're 25, you're literally living at home, can't get up, can't see people. I'm a mess. My health is spiraling out of control. And I'm sitting here, like, bills are piling up. I'm like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to take care of myself? All that potential that had been on my life and kind of over my life. How am I ever going to, like, live this out and feel fulfilled? And one of my friends called me. He's like, hey, I'm working at this pool shop. They need some computer help, which, my dad works with computers. I kind of knew a little bit. He was like, can you just come in and help? And I was like, yes, I'm in. Sign me up. I need something. I'm like, even if I make $100 today. Anyway, long story short, started chatting with the business owner, asked me to go for lunch, lunch over coffee. And we did that. And by the end of that meeting, he hired me to do his marketing.
Mm.
Uh, didn't go to school for marketing. Didn't know much. I liked it. Used that money to teach myself, start my first business. And that kind of just cascaded. And the crazy thing about that is that 12 years later, I still haven't gotten over. I still have a lot of the symptoms. Still struggle with the chronic pain and the headaches that can take me out. But as time has gone on, I've taught myself these survival skills in business. I've learned to build systems, and a big shift for me was changing my perspective. So a few years in, coming to this place that basically said, look, I didn't choose my circumstances. I didn't ask to be in this accident. I didn't ask to have these problems. I can't change the past, but I can control how I respond in the future. And that may sound cliche to a lot of people, but it was my lifeline. And because of that, I started pastoring again, got into real estate, did some real estate development, eventually had a successful exit from my marketing business, and it brought me here. And there's so many other details, but it's this idea that, I went through a really traumatic accident, and that could have very well derailed my entire life. Now I get to use that as a story to hopefully, like I was saying earlier, serve some people and maybe inspire others along the way.
Well, it definitely explains your story explains a lot on why you are so um, invested in the people that you work with, because people who have been through some issues definitely tend to be better when it comes to working with people. Empathy is a superpower, and a lot of people don't have that. They have this idea that, oh, you should do better, and just kind of leave it at that. But it's like, if you've been at the bottom, then you know what it's like to help somebody get to the top. And if you just always kind of been at the top, even if you're at the middle, higher class, whatever, it's hard for you to understand what it's like to help people at the bottom, or to even be at the bottom. So yeah, I definitely think your experience in your younger years has helped you understand people and empathize with them, to be like, hey, we can do this. We just need to do this, this, and this. It's going to be okay. That kind of stuff. It's irreplaceable when it comes to coaching. So yeah, I definitely think that's that's how you become the great speaker that you are.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, again, I wouldn't have chosen this path, but I can understand that there was a purpose behind everything that happened, and just got to make the best of it. And hopefully a few other people can come along for the ride.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and wrap this up. If you could give everybody, like, your, if you have socials, website, whatever, just to help people find you and get in contact with you.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, I love connecting with people. You can go to my website, consultingbyprime.com. That's consultingbyprime.com. Or you can find me on socials, LinkedIn or Instagram. It's Matthew Sanjari, Matthew Sanjari, Instagram and LinkedIn, Matthew Sanjari.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom on coaching and helping people become the best that they can be and doing better in their business, because we all know as business owners that it's sometimes difficult to kind of do things by yourself. And when you have like a coach come in, kind of open you up and figure out, hey, what's going on, do that kind of audit with you, it makes your life better. So yeah, you're doing great work. So thank you so much for sharing what you know.
Thanks for having me, man. Honestly, you were so easy to talk to, and it was awesome being on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.